What a privilege to be with you today as we remember an incredible moment in our nation's history. 15 years ago, yesterday, September 11th, 2001. And one of my favorite songs is the country and western song, "Where Were You in the World, South Germany?" That's the time one. Every one of us remembers where the relationship of America with the rest of the world changed. Where the sense of safety and invulnerability that we have had, being protected by two vast oceans, was changed irrevocably. The words printed, am I right? Never forget. Those words were said an awful lot in the days, weeks, and months to follow. I remember on September 11, 2001, my wife Heidi and I were visiting here in D.C. We were part of the Bush administration. We lived just about a mile from the Pentagon. Our apartment out the window, you could smell the soot, the stench that was in there. Heidi was working in the White House in the U.S. Trade Representative's office. She remembers how initially Secret Service agents came through and told everyone to stay with them. We don't know what happened. The first plane that hit, we don't know what happened. Just stay with them. And then the second plane. And everyone knew in an instant this was not some horrible accident. This wasn't a mistake that had turned tragic. This was a deliberate act of terror. Shortly thereafter, the Secret Service ran through the halls, telling everyone working there, run, don't walk, get out now. At the time, nobody knew if there was another plane headed for the Capitol, if there was another plane headed for the White House. We didn't know what would be next. How do you land out? She wasn't able to get her car, it was parked in the ground. So she took off her high heels and walked home barefoot. Walked across the Memorial Bridge. That day went on, we discovered, like so many, that a friend of ours, Barbara Olson, was among the victims who lost their lives. Barbara was in the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. Her husband Ted was a friend as well. She, as many of us know, called Ted from the plane. At that point, the planes in New York had already hit. So, the hopes that this would be resolved peaceably were not high. Reports were that Barbara's last words to Ted were, "What do we do? How do we stop?" I remember the next day, Heidi and I invited some friends of ours over to our home. Just for a prayer session. It was an interfaith prayer session. Just singing hymns and lifting up our country flag. It was a moment that brought this country together. I'll tell you, I have never been proud of the President of the United States. That when George W. Bush stood atop a pile of hope, side by side with fire, and as it was called out, "We can't hear you," he said, "But I can hear you. And soon the world will hear you as well." How much did that feel like 90 years ago? 15 years ago. We were all united. We all recognized we had to protect this country. For a period of time, we weren't Republicans or Democrats anymore, we were Americans. And where are we now? You know, I am so grateful to the men and women here. EMET does an extraordinary job.
The name of EMET, sometimes I wish y'all would spell it out more than just the Endowment for Middle East Truth. That's a powerful name. Truth is powerful. Truth cuts through. Since September 11th, we've seen victim of terrorism after victim of terrorism after victim of terrorism. And you know, there's a continuity. Whether Fort Hood or San Bernardino, whether Paris or Nice, whether Orlando or Jerusalem, there is a continuity of radical Islamic terrorists who have declared war, declared jihad, declared their intention to murder as many of us as possible. And yet the clarity we had on that September morning 15 years ago, for so many seems to have faded. Ken Stephan, who's here, his brother, was murdered by radical Islamic terrorists. It's not easy for him to stand up and tell his story. But there's power in truth. There's power in just standing up and speaking thank you. A couple of months ago, I chaired a hearing on the willful blindness of this administration. As a matter of policy, we heard testimony that the Department of Homeland Security conducted a purge, and that was the term they used, over 800 times deleting or changing DHS records to remove references to words like jihad or Muslim Brotherhood. Because those were inconsistent with the political narrative. In Orlando, horrific terror attack here on U.S. soil. The terrorist called 911, pledged his allegiance to ISIS, pledged his allegiance to al-Baghdadi. And then the Department of Justice released the 911 tape and edited out those portions. George Orwell must have been rolling over in his grave. And Loretta Lynch had the audacity after that to say, we don't know why he did what he did. Look, this ain't rocket science. He picked up the phone and told us why he did what he did. I understand if you erase it from the tape, then it may be a little mysterious to you. Look, this is a White House who, when the President of France is standing next to the President and makes reference to radical Islamic terrorism, they edit the President of France. If I would have suggested a year ago either of those would have happened, people would have said, oh, come on, that's crazy. And you know what? It is crazy. It is a willful blindness that endangers us. We do not acknowledge, this administration does not acknowledge the enemy and doesn't do what is needed to defeat it. What is so heartbreaking in one attack after another is how preventable these were. Fort Hood, Nidal Hassan, we knew that Nidal Hassan was communicating with Anwar al-Awlaki, was asking about the permissibility of waging jihad against his fellow soldiers. The Obama administration knew that, and they did nothing, and 14 innocent souls were murdered. The Zarnaev brothers. We knew they were affiliated with radical Islamic terrorists. The FBI went and interviewed them, and then dropped the ball, stopped watching. The elder Zarnaev brother posted on YouTube a public call to jihad. But the administration didn't see it because they weren't watching. Mind you, this is no sophisticated surveillance. This is going to YouTube. So the Boston bombers set off pressure cookers filled with explosives in the Boston Marathon. and the Orlando terrorist. Over and over again, we had the warning signs, we had the red flags, and yet, if you pretend radical Islamic terrorism doesn't exist, you don't actually notice when someone is practically screaming from the mountaintops their intention to wage war against us. And yet, perhaps the most tragic manifestation of all of this is that we've learned in recent days and weeks that this administration sent $1.7 billion in cash to the Ayatollah Khamenei. In money, sent to European banks, transferred to European currency, and loaded onto pallets to be flown in the dark of night in unmarked planes into Iran. Now, by the way, if any of us decided to wake up tomorrow and send $10 to terrorists who have declared jihad and are trying to murder American citizens, we should, and I hope would, be locked up and thrown in jail for doing it. And yet $1.7 billion is somehow different. And what does it say about the means of delivery? Is anyone else aware of any government-to-government payment in unmarked bills in a pile of cash? Let me ask you, in your life, suppose I was buying your home and I showed up at closing and said, I want to pay for your home with 3 duffel bags of cash, all 20s. Would that raise a red flag to you? Would that suggest, wait, why isn't there a cashier's check from a mortgage company here? I don't understand. What? The only reasonable inference from that is, number one, the administration knew what they were doing was lawless. They didn't want to be caught. They didn't want to wire the money because it was contrary to federal law, and the federal officials who approved it may well have committed criminal offenses. And number two, you know, part of the reason drug dealers like unmarked 20s, they're hard to track. We know to an absolute metaphysical certainty that Iran will use that money to murder Americans, to murder Europeans, to murder Israelis. It will fund Hamas, it will fund Hezbollah, it will fund more suicide bombings, it will fund more missiles, it will fund more murder of women and children and infants, and it is United States taxpayer dollars that are funding terrorists trying to murder us. 15 years ago yesterday, we all said never forget. And yet in this bizarre, upside-down, politically correct, topsy-turvy world, we've gone from never forget to sending pallets of unmarked cash to fund the terrorists that are trying to kill us. Truth has power. If it wasn't a ransom, why did the American hostages say that their plane stayed on the runway until the cash touched down? And by the way, what is the incentive that we've given Iran, we've given ISIS, we've given every Islamic terrorist, and for that matter, every bad actor on the face of the planet? If you too want $1.7 billion, and I don't know anyone here who doesn't want $1.7 billion.
I'm a terrorist.
But if that's what you want, the Obama administration has said it's very simple. Go find an American and kidnap them, and let's make a deal. It endangers more American lives. It endangers more Israeli lives. It endangers more European lives. It's madness. But I just want to thank the men and women in this room for shining a light, for telling the truth, and for never forgetting.